Marlene Warren was born on April 15, 1950 in Mount Clemens, Michigan, a small city sitting just north of Detroit. She was the middle child of 3 girls, raised in a household primarily led by her mother, Shirley, and her stepfather, Bill. Marlene was described as a child who was perpetually smiling. Both she and her mother shared a love for clowns. Marlene herself, as an adult, took up painting clowns and hung her own artwork on the walls of her home in Florida. She married young, and by the time she was around 18 years old, she had given birth to 2 sons named John and Joseph. The marriage to her first husband, who is referred to only as Aaron's, lasted until approximately 1970, when Marlene was around 20 years old. Some accounts describe him dying, while others refer to a divorce, but what is consistent across sources is that Marlene was largely a single mother. Rather than being broken by the weight of that responsibility, Marlene leaned into it. It was around this period at the age of 20 when a man named Michael Warren came into her life. Michael had grown up in Roseville, Michigan, not far from where Marlene was raised. He was 2 years younger than Marlene, but the two connected quickly. What impressed Marlene most was how naturally and genuinely Michael took to her boys. He didn't treat them as baggage from a previous relationship. Instead, he stepped into a paternal role, and the boys responded to him warmly. For a young widow raising 2 small children in the early 1970s, finding a man who embraced her sons as his own was no small thing. Additionally, Michael's family was in the meat industry, which his father introduced him to early in life. After dating for a few years, Marlene and Michael were married on April 27, 1972. After their marriage, the couple made the decision to leave Michigan behind and relocate to Florida. They eventually settled in the affluent community of Wellington, Florida. The couple chose to build their life in a private aeronautical housing development called Aero Club. Here, every residence on the property sat on a 1-acre lot and came with direct access to a shared private runway. The 4,000-foot paved and lit airstrip ran through the center of the community, and residents kept their private planes in hangars attached directly to their homes. The neighborhood was close to Wellington's equestrian venues and less than 90 nautical miles from the Bahamas. Once settled and comfortable, Michael channeled his energy into an automobile business. He opened a used car dealership and rental agency called A Bargain Motors based in West Palm Beach, which grew into a profitable operation. Meanwhile, Marlene managed multiple rental properties in West Palm Beach. She also co-owned an airplane, held interest in a racehorse, and separately took on work as a cargo ship inspector. For a period, the life the Warrens built seemed amazing on the surface, but in the fall of 1988, the family was hit with a devastating blow. Marlene's eldest son, John, was killed in a car accident at the age of 21. This magnitude of grief ultimately exposed the ongoing strains in the couple's relationship. While directing all of his energy into his business, Michael was simultaneously developing a relationship with one of his employees named Sheila Sheltra. Sheila was born and raised in LaBelle, Florida, a small town in Hendry County on the western edge of the state. She relocated to Martin County around 1980 and spent the early part of her adult life around instability. In 1984, she was arrested for shoplifting, and 2 years later, she was charged with felony theft and received 6 months of probation. Those around her described her as a woman with expensive tastes, but no means of satisfying them. In May 1987, Sheila married Richard Keene, a man nearly 20 years older than her. They had a son together named Charles shortly after. Both Sheila and Richard worked in the vehicle repossession business, and it was through this that they came to work for Michael Warren. The two would pick up cars on behalf of Michael's dealership from customers who had missed payments. It's unclear when exactly Sheila and Michael began seeing each other, but when it began, it was common knowledge among employees. Former employee Don Carter said it was no secret that he was a player. They'd leave the doors right open. There was no hiding it. Other employees described witnessing Michael and Sheila kissing and engaging in explicit activity in the office. The two were also known for taking unusually long and frequent lunches together. Richard himself later told police that he had been informed by his own contacts that his wife and Michael were having an affair. While this was going on, Michael was allegedly paying Sheila's rent at the apartment she moved into after separating from Richard. Marlene was not naive. She was aware of the affair and what it might mean for her future. She had already expressed to family members that she wanted out of the marriage and was considering a divorce, but she was also mindful of the financial dynamics at play. The family's assets were in her name, but a divorce would mean unwinding a complex web of shared business interests, real estate, and ongoing operations. More alarming than the prospect of divorce was the feeling that Marlene had. She expressed this feeling to two people, one of which was her son Joseph. She told him, "If anything does happen to me, your father did it." Joseph pushed back, saying that he couldn't imagine Michael doing anything like that. Adding to the weight of this statement, investigators would later uncover that Michael had approached a lawyer to ask about the ramifications if a spouse disappeared. By 1990, a shift occurred in the dynamic between Michael and Sheila. The long lunches stopped and the two seemed to somewhat drift apart. Employees stated that Michael was visibly distancing himself from Sheila. One source told investigators that Sheila did not take it well and had grown emotionally dependent on Michael and interpreted his withdrawal as a threat to the future they had been building toward. In April 1990, a married couple referred to as the Restivos rented a white 1990 Chrysler LeBaron convertible from a Payless auto rental location near downtown West Palm Beach. They finished with the vehicle earlier than they had anticipated and went to return it after hours, only to find the car lot dark and unstaffed. Unsure of what to do, they went home and flipped through the yellow pages in search of a Payless phone number. What they found instead was an advertisement that closely resembled the business. It was close enough that they dialed the number believing they had reached the rental company. The number belonged to A Bargain Motors, Michael Warren's used car dealership. Interestingly, Payless had already filed both a civil lawsuit and lodged a criminal complaint against Michael, accusing him of intentionally designing his phone book advertisement to mimic Payless's listing and divert their business. The man who answered the Restivos' call told them not to worry about returning the car in person. He instructed them to simply leave the vehicle on the street with the keys placed in the sun visor and assured them someone would come by and collect it. The couple, though reluctant, complied. They parked the LeBaron and walked away. The car was gone by the time anyone from Payless looked for it. On April 15th, the convertible was officially reported as stolen. What happened between the moment the Restivos left the keys in the car and the moment the company filed the theft report was later reconstructed through the testimony of a Bargain Motors employee named Claude Poitras. According to him, shortly after the phone call from the couple, he drove both Michael and Sheila to the location of the parked car. He watched from his own vehicle as the two of them climbed into the white convertible and drove it away together. Before they separated, Michael turned to Claude and told him not to say anything to anyone about the car. It was also in April that Marlene had reached her breaking point with the marriage after 18 years with her husband. According to Joseph, his mother told him that the two of them were going to move. It was also around this time when Marlene's mother, Shirley, who was living in Las Vegas, received a phone call from Marlene saying that same thing she told Joseph about how Michael may want her out of the picture permanently. Shirley told Marlene she could stay with her in Las Vegas, but Marlene never made it out. On the evening of Thursday, May 24th, two employees were working a closing shift at the Spotlight Costume Shop, located at 5612 South Dixie Highway in West Palm Beach. Their names were Deborah Offord and Dinah Rosales. A third employee, Barbara Castricone, was also present that evening. The store was getting ready to close when a woman knocked at the glass door. The woman had long, thick, straight brown hair and large brown eyes. She was tall and slender with a build that some witnesses would later describe as somewhat masculine. The employees let her in and the woman told them that she needed a clown costume. It was noted that she appeared to be in a rush. When Offord suggested that she could return the next day when they had more time to help her, the woman sternly said, "No, I need something right now." She ultimately left with an orange wig, a red nose, a full jumpsuit, white gloves, and makeup. When offered clown shoes as well, the woman declined, which would be a key detail later on. 2 days later, on Saturday at approximately 9:20 a.m., a woman matching the same description from the costume shop walked into a public supermarket. The woman went to the floral section and selected a bouquet of carnations. She then gathered 2 balloons. The first was a silver mylar balloon printed with the phrase, "You're the greatest." The second featured Snow White and the 7 dwarfs. While the morning was still quiet at the Warren home, Michael was already leaving. He had arranged to spend the morning at a horse racetrack with a group of friends. The group loaded into a car and headed south on the interstate toward Calder Racetrack. By approximately 10 a.m., Michael was well on the road and away from the property. Back at the residence, Marlene was awake and moving around the house. Joseph, who had recently broken his leg and was wearing a cast, was also home. Several of his friends had come over, including a young woman named Jeannie Pratt. The group was eating breakfast and watching television in the living room area. At approximately 10:45 a.m., a car turned off the road and rolled up the long driveway of the Warren property. From the living room, Joseph and his friends had a direct line of sight through the glass of the front door and could see the driveway. The vehicle that approached was a white Chrysler LeBaron convertible with no plates. It stopped and a figure dressed in a complete clown costume stepped out. The face was entirely obscured by thick white paint. In the figure's hands were the bouquet of flowers and 2 balloons. Notably, Joseph found it strange that this clown was not wearing matching clown shoes. Instead, they were just wearing normal boots. Inside the house, Jeannie looked up from breakfast and saw the clown approaching. At first, the group assumed that the clown was meant for Joseph as a lighthearted get-well-soon gesture. Jeannie recalled Marlene moved excitedly toward the front door after noticing the clown as she loved them. She opened the front door and stepped out, saying something along the lines of, "Oh, how pretty." The clown, still silent, then raised a handgun and fired a single shot at Marlene's face at close range. The bullet struck her in the upper lip, ultimately lodging in her spinal cord. The shot was fired at approximately 10:50 a.m. Marlene collapsed backward into the entryway of her home, the flowers and balloons scattering around her as she fell. Inside the living room, the sound registered first as a balloon pop, but then they saw Marlene go down and reality set in. Joseph, despite his broken leg, ran to his mother, eventually holding eye contact with the clown who was still at the doorstep. In later interviews, he described the clown as, quote, having just really dark eyes, brown eyes. He added that the face paint was so smoothed out that the clown almost looked more like a doll. Moments later, the clown turned and calmly walked down the driveway toward the LeBaron. Joseph then made his way to his own car to give chase. At the same time, Jeannie jumped into the car with him. The two sped off to close the gap with the LeBaron, but its head start was much too great, ultimately vanishing. By the time the two returned to the house, medical officials were already working on his mother. Marlene was loaded into an ambulance, still alive but in critical condition. She was placed on life support, and her mother flew in from Las Vegas immediately after finding out about the incident. Michael was also notified and comforted Joseph at Marlene's bedside. In interviews, Shirley stated that when she saw Michael, he immediately figured he was responsible. Roughly 3 hours after the shooting, the sheriff's office received an anonymous tip from a female caller. She told detectives that a woman was shot named Marlene Warren and that they needed to look into her husband, Michael, and a woman named Sheila Keene. The caller provided additional context about the strained marriage, the affair, and the inner workings on the couple's finances. At 3:18 p.m. that afternoon, detectives conducted their first formal interview with Michael. He gave them his alibi and denied any romantic relationship with Sheila, describing her as nothing more than a business associate. 4 hours later, the owner of the costume shop contacted the sheriff's office. The shop owner had spent the day watching the news coverage and recognized the description of the clown's costume as matching the outfit that had been purchased at his store just 48 hours earlier. He gave investigators the information they needed to begin tracing the customer. For 2 days, Marlene remained on life support at Palms West Hospital. The bullet in her spinal cord had ended any realistic possibility of recovery, but her body continued to function as long as the machines ran. Holding Joseph's hand, Shirley said to pull it and just let her go. Minutes later, Joseph confirmed with staff that it was okay for them to take his mother off of life support. Marlene was pronounced dead at 9:30 p.m. on Monday, May 28, 1990, at the age of 40 years old. Early on, detectives sat down with Michael for a formal interview. He told them he had been on his way to a racetrack with friends when his wife was shot, which was later confirmed. He also denied categorically that he had ever been romantically involved with an employee named Sheila. He described their relationship as strictly professional. One day after the shooting, detectives tracked down and interviewed Sheila's estranged husband, Richard. He told detectives that Sheila had left him a few months earlier and that he had reason to believe that she was having an affair with Michael, who Richard had considered a friend. He said he was not particularly bitter about the situation, but he was clear about what he believed had been happening. He added that approximately 1 month earlier, Sheila had asked him if he had seen her .38 caliber revolver that she had misplaced. She couldn't find it and wanted to know if he had accidentally taken it when he moved out. Richard said he had not. This revolver matched the round that killed Marlene. That same day, detectives questioned Sheila as well. She stated that the previous day she had been out on her own, driving around Lake Worth, Boynton Beach, and Riviera Beach looking for vehicles she planned to repossess. Investigators then asked which vehicles specifically she was trying to locate and what were the exact addresses she visited. Sheila was unable to produce a single address and couldn't describe any of the cars she was supposedly searching for. She was not accused outright of killing Marlene, but was asked whether or not she had visited a costume shop or a Publix grocery store, to which she denied. Her neighbors later revealed that they had seen Michael frequently visiting Sheila's apartment at all hours of the day and night. This directly contradicted the claims that their relationship was solely professional. 4 days after the shooting, employees at a Winn-Dixie shopping center on Okeechobee Boulevard noticed a car that had been parked in their lot for several days. The employees called police, and when they arrived, they discovered that it was the missing white Chrysler LeBaron. The car was approximately 8 miles from the crime scene and approximately 9 miles from Sheila's apartment on Sable Pine Circle. Inside the vehicle, they found synthetic orange fibers as well as a brown human hair. It didn't take long for officials to realize that the car had been reported as stolen weeks ago and was supposed to be returned to a location near Michael's own business. A search warrant for Sheila's apartment was obtained shortly after, and investigators were hoping they would find both the clown costume as well as the firearm within. However, neither one was found. It is believed that both the costume and the gun were disposed of. This claim came from a deathbed account from a man named John Moran Sr. who worked with Michael. According to him, the evidence was inside a car that had been pushed into a canal sometime after the murder. His son, John Jr., was the one to share this information after his father's death in 1996, but the search of the apartment wasn't entirely fruitless. Detectives recovered orange-yellow acrylic fibers from clothing inside Sheila's closet. A forensic examination concluded that those fibers were similar in composition to the ones found inside the LeBaron. They also recovered brown human hair from the bathroom trash. Forensic comparison of the hair samples from the apartment and the car concluded the samples were consistent. Investigators also recovered 2 pairs of black lace-up boots from the apartment, matching the description given by Joseph. Analysis of the boots found additional orange fibers on the soles. Furthermore, burgundy fibers found on the boots were determined to be identical to the carpet recovered from the LeBaron's interior. Separately from the apartment search, detectives continued working the retail trail. 2 Publix employees were interviewed and confirmed that they had seen a woman purchasing the exact flowers and balloons found at the crime scene. Both independently described the buyer as a white female with long brown hair tied in a ponytail and with male mannerisms. When shown a photo lineup, the employees confirmed the buyer matched Sheila's appearance. As the murder investigation continued accumulating circumstantial evidence without producing a prosecutable case, a parallel track opened. Detectives, while examining the operations of Bargain Motors, began uncovering what turned out to be a sprawling pattern of financial crimes at Michael's dealership. He had been running a fraudulent operation for years. The scheme involved rolling back odometers on used vehicles to make the cars appear to have far fewer miles than they actually had, allowing the dealership to charge inflated prices to unsuspecting buyers. In addition to odometer fraud, the investigation revealed patterns of insurance fraud, grand theft auto, and racketeering. On October 26, 1990, 5 months after Marlene's death, Michael was arrested for charges unrelated to the shooting. The murder case, meanwhile, ran into a problem. DNA technology in 1990 was still in its earliest stages as a forensic tool. The hairs recovered had been compared and found consistent, but microscopic hair analysis was not the same as a DNA match. Prosecutors reviewed the evidence they had assembled and viewed it as insufficient. While the investigations proceeded, a civil battle was simultaneously taking shape over Marlene's estate. In total, across all of their assets, their portfolio was worth over $1 million at the time of the murder. And as mentioned before, most of these were under Marlene's name, meaning Joseph was in line to inherit much of it. Keep in mind, Joseph was only about 21 years old at the time, with no legal resources or deep knowledge of finances. Michael, however, was far better equipped for a dispute. The outcome, according to Joseph, was that he was left with next to nothing. Whatever share of the estate he might have been entitled to, the result was that Michael retained control of the properties and assets that Marlene had built. Joseph eventually left Florida, moving to Las Vegas and then Iowa, where he started a construction company, drawing on skills that his mother had taught him. This incident effectively ended all relations with his former stepfather. In 1992, Michael stood trial for the fraud charges from the Bargain Motors investigation. One of the witnesses called by prosecutors was Della Ward, a former bookkeeper who had worked at Bargain Motors and knew both Michael and Sheila personally. She was designated a hostile witness, meaning she was not cooperative with the prosecution's line of questioning and had to be treated as an adversarial witness despite being called by the state. Ward was fiercely loyal to Michael and remained unconvinced that he was involved in the murder. She later said that prosecutors had pushed her to say negative things about him, which she refused to do. Despite her resistance, the case against Michael for the fraud charges was strong enough already, and he was ultimately convicted. However, despite the conviction in 1992, Michael did not immediately begin serving his sentence. The case went through the sentencing and appeals process over the following 2 years, and he was not ordered to report to prison until March 31st, 1994. On December 31st, 1997, Michael was released from prison after serving nearly 4 years. He had never been charged with anything connected to the murder of his wife. After his release, Michael relocated to Abingdon, Virginia, near the Tennessee border. He arrived with a woman he introduced as Debbie, a blonde-haired woman who kept to herself and ran the front of the operation at their new business, a drive-through burger restaurant called The Purple Cow in Kingsport, Tennessee. In reality, this woman was actually Sheila. At this point, about 7 years had passed since Marlene's death, and Sheila had never been charged in relation to the shooting. On August 15th, 2002, Sheila and Michael got married in Las Vegas. Former employees at the Purple Cow described Sheila as overly aggressive and mean. Rumors about their past occasionally circulated among staff, with some workers claiming they had heard that Sheila had killed Michael's ex-wife. On a side note, it was reported that Sheila had dressed in a full clown costume at least once at the restaurant for a Halloween celebration. At this point, the case has substantial circumstantial evidence pointing to Sheila as being the killer, but the officials were unable to press any charges. This led to the case being stuck in a state of limbo for about 2 decades. In 2013, Palm Beach County Sheriff Rick Bradshaw directed his cold case squad to pull the Marlene Warren file back out of the vault. The decision was driven by a combination of institutional persistence and the advancements made in forensic science over the years. The squad assigned to the reinvestigation was led by Detective Paige McCann. McCann and her team started at the beginning. They pulled out the original case file, which was several hundred pages long, and went back through every piece of evidence and every witness statement from 1990. But the most critical part was the re-examination of the hairs and fibers recovered from Sheila's apartment and the LeBaron. Applying modern DNA testing to the root of the hair fiber determined that it was a match to Sheila's DNA. By the summer of 2017, McCann and the sheriff's office had concluded that the combination of the updated DNA analysis, the refreshed witness identifications, and the additional existing circumstantial evidence of the investigation was sufficient to support a first-degree murder charge. Attorney Dave Ehrenberg's office announced that it would seek the death penalty against Sheila. Now all that remained was finding the right moment to make the arrest. On the evening of September 26, 2017, 27 years after Marlene died, Michael was driving the couple's vehicle along Good Hope Road near Tennessee. Lieutenant Dewey Fulton was among the officers involved in the stop. His team placed road flares along a sharp curve in the road to slow approaching traffic and create the appearance of a standard checkpoint. The plan was to stop Michael's vehicle as it came through on the pretense of a routine check and then execute the arrest warrant. When approaching the flares, Michael stopped without incident. Lieutenant Fulton approached the passenger side of the vehicle where Sheila was seated and asked her for ID. She handed him a Tennessee driver's license bearing the name Sheila Warren. Fulton noted the name, reached in, opened her door, and said, "Ma'am, we have a warrant for your arrest." Michael was brought in for questioning the following day, but was not charged. He insisted that Sheila was innocent and had nothing to do with Marlene's murder. Sheila, 54 years old at the time of her arrest, was taken into custody without resistance. She was denied bail at her initial court appearance in Florida and subsequently transferred to Palm Beach County Jail, where she would remain without bond for the next 5.5 years. In June 2020, the trial was moved to April 9th, 2021 by Judge Joseph Marks due to the pandemic. By the summer of 2021, the April trial date had also come and gone. Defense attorneys filed a motion to postpone again, citing the case's age, the pandemic, and other reasons. Judge Scott Suskauer, who had taken over the case, granted the motion and set a new trial date of March 21st, 2022. That date also collapsed. In May 2022, the trial, then rescheduled for June 3rd, was again postponed, this time by approximately 4 months. Defense attorneys once again attempted to drag out the trial, citing that it was difficult to locate and contact key witnesses due to the amount of time that had passed. The judge was visibly frustrated. He told the lawyers that he had already cleared his schedule and delayed other trials and hearings to accommodate the case. He nonetheless approved the delay. In March 2022, a new and explosive element entered the pre-trial proceedings. The defense revealed that investigators had been aware of a man named Edward Barr, a criminal then incarcerated in a prison in New England who had allegedly confessed to the Marlene Warren murder on multiple occasions. According to court documents, Edward had told a fellow inmate in Maine that the craziest thing he had ever done in his criminal career was killing a woman in Wellington, Florida while wearing a clown disguise. He allegedly made similar statements to prison guards in both Maine and Connecticut. In interviews, Edward reportedly told the detective he would share everything he knows, but only if the detective could promise him he would not face the electric chair for what he was about to say. When the detective explained that no such guarantee could be made, Edward asked for an attorney and refused to continue speaking. The defense argued that the state had failed to turn over documents related to Edward's alleged confession in a timely manner and accused the prosecution of withholding exculpatory material that the defense was entitled to review. Prosecutors ultimately agreed to allow the jury to hear Edward's story at trial, calculating that his complete lack of credibility would be more damaging than helpful to the defense. By early 2023, a trial date of May 12, 2023 had been set. Both sides completed a final round of pre-trial hearings, and it seemed that finally, after years of postponement, the trial would finally take place. Then, with less than 3 weeks remaining before jury selection was scheduled to begin, everything changed. In the final days before trial, State Attorney Dave Ehrenberg and his prosecution team confronted a specific legal danger that had not been fully resolved. There was the question of whether the fiber and DNA evidence from the LeBaron would ultimately survive the defense's tampering challenge if a jury were actually seated. On April 25, 2023, rather than risk that outcome, prosecutors and defense reached a plea agreement. Sheila, then 59 years old, under the terms, pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in the 1990 killing of Marlene Warren. The reduction from first degree to second was substantial. The sentence was 12 years in prison, but with credit for the time she had already served, which again was over 5 years. Despite standing in court and formally admitting to the murder of Marlene, Sheila maintained her personal innocence. On November 2nd, 2024, Sheila was released from prison at the age of 61. The case remains one of Florida's more bizarre crimes involving a justice system that many feel let Marlene down.